Hi there, this is Ronnie coming at you with a video. I'm going to do a quick link to John, the Red Dice Diaries video where he asked people what three things do you look for in a role-playing game system. And I thought I would do a video response to his video. It's going to be fairly quick. What do I look for? After 30 years, I've went through very basic systems and very complex systems and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I can only really say what really appeals to me now. That really grabs me in terms of the kind of games that I'm going to buy. So, first of all, it has to have a fairly straightforward central mechanic. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean simplistic, but one that makes sense so that when any kind of role has to come up, you've got a fair idea what you're going to do right off the bat. I mean, games such as, to use an old favourite, Nephilim, was very complicated. It was probably one of the more extreme versions of the basic role-playing game. It had lots of different things which you had to do for different, it was like a D20 for some things and D% for others, and you had to take a particular score, and depending on what day of the week it was, when you were casting a spell, would depend on the percentage, and it was doable, but you had to sit there and scratch your head about it. Whereas something like A Song of Ice and Fire, whilst it is fairly involved, the central mechanic of roll a bunch of d6s, and you add up the total of either all of them or a smaller subset if you've used some of your specialties, works. It's a very simple, straightforward mechanic. So that's the first thing. It has to be something. The games I tend to play are the ones that have got a very straightforward mechanic. I like Savage Worlds because regardless of what you're doing, unless it's melee combat, you're always looking for a 4. It's fairly straightforward. True 20 only uses a d20, and you're always rolling high, so it's very simple systems. So I tend to find I like straightforward mechanics. Doesn't have to be utterly simplistic, but straightforward. Secondly, and this I agree with John, setting. Settings intrigue me. Dare I say it? Sod it. It's my favourite game. I'm going to say it anyway. Castle Falkenstein grabbed me straight away because it was our own Victorian Europe, but with steampunk and fantasy. It was such an incredible sort of mix and sort of mashup, which for some sort of mid-90s was just wow, and I just went for it straight away. More recently, Blue Rose, because it's dealing with an egalitarian society, because it's dealing with a setting where there is more emphasis on personal interaction, therefore investigation, intrigue, and so on, rather than combat. It makes for a different kind of fantasy game. Fortune's Fool, which also falls into the third category for me, but Fortune's Fool because it's our own Renaissance Europe, but with elves and dwarves. The other thing I like to get with regards to setting is sometimes I like to get a nice generic for a genre. Recently for Savage Worlds I picked up Thrilling Tales, which is it's 1930s, it's pulp 1930s, which I really wanted to get. I had kind of hoped that Pinnacle would have released Pulp Companion, an update of their original Pulp toolkits, but that is either not going to happen or it's going to be way off in the distance. Whereas Thrilling Tales gives me that. So, if it's a setting I don't quite have that intrigues me, then I'll get it. This is the reason why I don't own D&D 5th edition. Because I've got so many generic fantasy games that it's completely surplus to requirements for me. I mean, as much as Nephilim, I mentioned before, has a bit of a convoluted system, the setting is beautiful, and it's almost worth going through the convolution for it. I very much like the idea of the Dragon Age role-playing game. I like the idea of having a role-playing game set in Westeros, so I got A Song of Ice and Fire. Nicely, both of them use a rule system, a different one in both cases, but a rule system that I like as well. So yeah, the setting really can sell it for me. And the third thing that tends to sort of draw my eye is if it has something a little different. Going back to Falkenstein, it doesn't use dice, it uses playing cards. As something a little different from other games. I love Cult because it uses only a 20-sided die. True 20 grabbed my attention for that same reason. I liked Savage Worlds because it uses wound levels as opposed to hit points. Fortune's Fool, the other reason it caught my eye is because it uses a tarot deck rather than dice or playing cards, and the GM never touches the deck, which really they're things that are different, and I've tended to find, as much as sometimes a setting might have a more sort of traditional rule set or mechanic, or just use dice, sometimes I find myself really drawn to a system that's a little different. I think the only one, I've got a PDF of active exploits, but I've read through it and it looks okay, but it's not quite the super diceless system. I would love to get one that is purely, where you purely have a pool of points, and there's no dice or cards or anything involved, because I think that would be interesting. It would be interesting for a LARP as well, I think. Although I have not played a LARP, so maybe LARP players would little more able to sort of talk about that. But so the three things for me are a good, solid central mechanic, a setting that just grabs me straight away, and the third, I hate to use the X Factor because it's been completely hijacked by that bloody TV show. But you know, if it has something unique, a flavor or a mechanic that just grabs me and says, "Yeah, take a look at this," then I'm more likely to be drawn to it. So that is mine. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video.